Welcome to Expansion Projects, preparing your co-op for successful growth. We wanted to hear from the experts on this, so we started with Bill Gessner, an expansion and development expert and consultant with CDS Consulting Co-op. He's also a member of the Cooperative Hall of Fame. And then we also wanted to hear from some people who've recently done expansion projects and see what the lessons learned in those were. And we've got Alex Jory and John Hatton from Brattleboro Co-op, Chris Dilley and Heather Jana from People's Kalamazoo, Margo O'Brien from St. Peter Co-op, Kim Davis from Three Rivers Market in Knoxville. We want to thank all of those people for taking the time and sharing their wisdom with us. And collecting that wisdom and distilling it down into a short amount of time was a difficult task, but we did manage to get this video in under an hour. So there's a lot of great material here, so please stick with it and carve out enough time so you can catch all of this stuff. You'll notice as you go through it, there's some varying quality in the audio-visual stuff. So again, please be patient with that, and hopefully it won't detract too much from the fantastic content. So here we go with expansion projects.
We went to the shareholders and to our whole community, and we met with them in a number of different places, in a meeting place downtown, at the co-op. We even offered to meet in people's kitchens, tried to give people a variety of venues and options in which to meet with us and give us feedback on what they wanted for their co-op, for this co-op in the future. And we sent out or actually management did send out a shareholder survey that talked about values, talked about a number of things, but also talked about what do you want? And the question became, what do you want from this co-op for your children's grandchildren? And from that evolved the 100-year plan, the 100-year vision and the 100-year plan, which is very far-reaching, and we know it's going to, of course, keep changing. And we've looked at changing it only 7 years later. But we developed that from this feedback loop, from the inputs from the shareholders and the community. And one of the points that the shareholders were very clear about was that we needed a new facility. We, of course, knew that, but it was good to have that feedback from the shareholders, from the owners of the co-op.
So we're here today to talk a little bit about your co-op's expansion project. You've probably been at it for a while at your co-op, looking at it, expansion opportunities and challenges. Management of the co-op has been probably doing an assessment and doing some planning work. I always really advocate having a good process for expansion planning. As opposed to just jumping at an opportunity that gets presented to you and saying, you need to let us know by the end of the week whether you're going to take this option. And so rather than working in that context, to really have a systematic approach to expansion planning that gives you time to build a commitment level in the organization, to get pointed in a direction that you would say this is our preferred direction, and to test that, to say this is our plan A and this is our plan B and maybe even a plan C, and then to systematically plan and prepare for that, and to assess whether there's appropriate organizational readiness, to assess whether there's an appropriate level of commitment in your organization, and to determine whether there is alignment at the leadership level. I think the key to a successful expansion project really begins with the board and general manager relationship. Is there alignment there? And is there a strong and effective relationship there? If there is, you have a chance of being successful. If you do not have that alignment and do not have a strong relationship, there's a very good chance that you will not be able to be successful with an expansion project.
Well, I've always maintained that the most dynamic relationship has to be the relationship between the the general manager and the board president. That, to me, is important because the general manager really needs to know the flavor of what's going on with the board. And if you have a good relationship with your board president, then you'll know where the board's at. And if you have a board president who is who understands where you're coming from as general manager, then there's a likelihood that you'll get along much better. And I just feel that without a good relationship with the general manager and the board, the co-op really can't function.
We always tried to give very clear direction to Alex. We have a huge amount of respect for Alex, Alex Giori. He's a great general manager, and so when he came to us with recommendations from himself and from his core team, you know, we really took that to heart, and we listened to him pretty carefully and tried to be thorough in our discussions and to get an understanding of what was behind the recommendations.
An expansion project takes you way beyond your normal scope of operations, and it's a stretch. And does your organization have the capacity to stretch and to stretch in a new direction? I like to say and encourage you to make a separation between your regular store operation, which as a co-op you have a store or you have multiple stores, and they run kind of according to a system and a formula. And a project is a very different thing. It's a different type of creature. It theoretically has a beginning and theoretically has an end. And can you keep the operations of your co-op going while you do a project, and can you do those concurrently? And that is having a multiple focus. And it took me a long time to develop that skill, and it's not an easy thing. And one way to kind of look at this and say, what is the risk that you're taking here, and how do you develop a comfort level with that risk, both if you're on the board of directors or if you're a general manager. I think it's important to say, what will it take to make me comfortable with this level of risk? And maybe as an individual or as a group, you are risk adverse, but it's also important to say, what is the risk that we're taking if we don't do this expansion, if we don't pursue this expansion project? Risk is a big part of this, and taking risk in a way that you're comfortable and confident is very important. And so I like to use the word comfort. What will it take to make you comfortable with this level of risk?
Well, for that, I put my trust into the experts, Bill Gessner and CE. So we had both of them on board, and I really kind of deferred that to them, all of the pro formas and things like that. I had no experience in doing anything like that before. So, and I wouldn't have felt so good had we not had people who had done this kind of thing repeatedly on our side and helping us out. So that felt really great that we could feel comfortable in expanding to a certain size. Of course, a lot of us wanted to be bigger with our move, but they kind of reeled us in, and Bill had told us stories about co-ops who try to go too big too fast and then crumble. So they really kind of, through their experience and with their projections and working with Chris on all the numbers, helped me feel really comfortable about what we were going ahead to do.
Basically what it came down to was we're engaging with the people who know enough about how to do this that they're going to keep us out of trouble. Yeah, and we also worked with the NCGA Development Cooperative, which was a great, transition from Bill to that was a great move for us to be able to just say, yeah, we're still in good hands through this whole process where we have people we can trust to look to say whether we're doing this in a way that's going to work well for us or not.
I think that the risk assessment was probably one of the biggest challenges that our board faced. And, you know, I think boards tend to be a conservative lot of people, and I think in many ways that's a really good thing. But I think because it was a multi-year, took a long time process, that allowed them in very small increments to get closer and closer and closer to being comfortable. I also think that, you know, there is this other side of risk management which they assessed, and that was what happens if we don't move forward, because that also has its element of risk. And so I think very slowly we went through that process, and I think what finally convinced them and made them more comfortable was realizing what the risk of not moving forward actually was.
Yeah, what the Feasibility program really did for us was give us a common outlet and a common a reason to have an ongoing conversation about who we are as an organization, how we're trying to work together, what our roles are. We do policy governance, which works really, really well for our board and our organization. And so CBIL just gave us this opportunity to kind of grow together, learn about each other a little bit more, and build some capacity, which was really fundamental to getting ready for the expansion.
The primary tools that I encourage both board and management to utilize in expansion planning, and I'll work with this a little bit here, and just say that there are probably three primary tools that I like to say that you should focus on. One being timeline, another being sources and uses, budget, and the third being a little bit more broader and a little more difficult to get your hands around, but let's call it purpose, and let's call it policy, let's call it parameters, and let's call it concept. And utilizing these three very simple tools and keeping them in front of you throughout the expansion planning process, primarily perhaps driven by management, but also using these as both management and communication tools, working with the board. These are the primary tools to help you arrive at a place of comfort, and as a way to gain comfort with the level of risk. So as you're trying to assess the risk and find a comfort level and the risk related to a project, again, it's really important to have a good and effective process. And to think of a process, it's important to think of a timeline and what are the stages of a project. At the very beginning of a project, you're not making the final decision, the final go or no-go decision on day one. You're setting up a timeline and a process where you can study and learn and assess the feasibility of your preferred direction or of your preferred site. So I like to look at it in terms of a 4-stage timeline. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, and 4. Stage 1 at the beginning being assessing feasibility. And I think it's the most important stage of a project, and in many ways the most complex. And I like to say that it takes anywhere from 3 months, although I've never seen it take that short of a time, 3 months to 3 years plus. And I've seen some co-ops work at it for 6 years, working through the feasibility stage of a project. And the type of things that happen in the feasibility stage, typically a group is most concerned about where is the site going to be and the site search, and that dominates all the thinking and the discussion. But really in stage one there's a lot more to that, and I refer to there being I put a strong emphasis on commitment, beginning to build an initial level of commitment to explore and pursue expansion. And then there's the planning. So commitment and planning is one type of activity. Another type of activity in the feasibility stage is strengthening and positioning. And the third type of activity is the site search and securing. These do not necessarily happen sequentially. They happen concurrently. While you're keeping the store going, you have this project, and within this project there are, even in stage one, there are three things that you're doing. Can you have a multiple focus, and can you sustain a multiple focus? Or, as I say a lot of times, do you need to spend all of your time unloading the truck? And you know, co-ops have grown beyond the point where everybody is focused on gathering around the truck and unloading that. But initially, that was about all that could be done at the co-op.
We spent a lot of time searching. We had a 30-month search process for a new site, and obviously there's lots of decision points along the way related to that. The first decision point being whether we're going to expand at all or not, I suppose. And we actually had a rubric or a model that we used in Excel where we rated different sites based on different required or hoped for aspects or factors. And that was a really great tool that we could use to be all on the same page about, you know, figuring out, in terms of the actual location, figuring out what works and what doesn't, and what we're, you know, a lot of little decisions along the way that can kind of help to shape a final product that we were really happy with in the ultimate, in the long run.
I think transparent communication was our biggest asset, and Chris Dilley is a great communicator. When we got to the point of looking at locations, he created this amazing table where he listed all the possibilities, and then he weighted different aspects like walkable, parking, loading dock, space available, room for expansion, all these different aspects that were important to us, and he weighted them according to how important they were. And they were all on this really easy to read table. So at our board meetings, he would put these up on a big screen, and we would all take a look at them and be able to talk about them and have that information really handy. And he would update it all the time. And he would just always do things like that, along with his policy monitoring reports, to make sure we knew everything that was happening, to ask for input when it was appropriate to do that, and make sure we were really clear on everything that was going on.
If you've been at it for a while, through stage one, typically that would be, let's say, a year and a half to work your way through a feasibility stage. And then stage two, depending on the size and scope of the project, that's going to be anywhere from 2 to 12 months, or more typically 4 to 6 months. And so the process that you're trying to have here, and to have a successful and effective process, can span on average, let's say a year and a half for assessing feasibility, and let's say 5 months, 6 months here. So we have a two-year process from the beginning of stage one to the end of stage two. And one point that I really like to make is, some co-ops say, well, we're not ready to begin stage one because we have to do all these things to strengthen our organization and get ready before we can do that. And the point I emphasize is that getting ready and strengthening your organization is part of expansion planning. And I think you should be comfortable recognizing that. You're not making the final decision point up here or at this point. You're trying to establish a commitment level, and you're building that commitment level throughout the course of of the expansion planning process. So as you work your way through stage 1 and say, yes, we've secured our site with contingencies, and now we go through an expensive process in stage 2, doing the design work, getting all of the financing, raising the capital from the members. That's effectively the voice of the members saying, yes, we're on board for this project. We're putting sizable funds in at risk, and the members are showing their support for the direction that the board is endorsing. And so all in all, if you build in your stakeholders, and you have a wide variety of stakeholders internally within the co-op, including the members, and externally in terms of your outside community or your bank or outside expertise that you're working with, if you have a series of large group of stakeholders that are invested in the success of your project, and everybody's on board, and there's alignment as you're approaching this final no-go decision point.
I think a really interesting thing in a project like, well, any expansion project, are all those decision points as you get to that great big cliff where you fall off and say, we're going to do this. I think there's so many things in play in terms of putting a project together. In our case, it was the purchase of a property that had a different set of issues than doing leasehold. So, but both instances, I've experienced both of those, and those are always an extremely rocky ride because you are not necessarily in control of that process. So I think learning that that was your role is trying to get what you wanted, but knowing that you weren't totally in control was very helpful in that decision point. But once you finally get to that point where you can secure a site, hopefully you've done all the other decision points before that, and you're working on these things together. So that all of your financing and your member things and making sure that you have your member equity pieces lined up. I mean, that's a huge decision point, whether we can make these commitments that we put into our pro forma. So that was another major one, that yes, we actually made those goals, and then you secure a site, and then that's where you fall off the cliff.
This work, in these three types of work, yields an assessment of feasibility. And when people think about feasibility, a lot of times they just think about, we're going to have a feasibility study done, we're going to push a button, and out is going to pop a feasibility study that's going to proclaim whether this is feasible or not. And I think that's a dangerous way of thinking. I think feasibility work is a process. It takes time, and I think that there are at least 4 dimensions of feasibility that are relevant in the case of a food co-op expanding or relocating to a new location or adding a second or third store. I think of the types of feasibility, the 4 types being market feasibility, internal readiness, financial feasibility, and design feasibility. And I suggest that you do work in all 4 of these areas. You would have a market study. You would assess your internal readiness. What are the areas of your co-op? What are the systems that need strengthening? And what are your plans to strengthen those areas? And then to do financial feasibility work, including a financial pro forma. And lastly, to do some preliminary design work around your preferred site. For example, you could have a market study that would say, yes, you have this looks like a good market opportunity, there's potential, and your sales could be $6.27 million. Does that tell you anything about whether this is feasible overall? It's one piece of it, but you really have to work in these other areas. It might be feasible from a market point of view, but do you have the internal readiness? Do you have the capacity to pull this off? And financially, is this feasible? Can you service the debt that would be required? And from a design point of view, is the specific site suitable to function as a grocery store. And preliminary design work can help you with that. If you think that you have a feasible plan and you have a site and you work through the negotiations to either lease it or purchase it, you come to the end of stage 1, which is your first major decision point. There have been a number of decision points perhaps up until that, but at the end of stage 1, we have an important decision point, and that is represented by securing a site with a contingency, and that primary contingency is the financing contingency. So you secure a site through a lease agreement or a purchase agreement, you get the site under the co-op's control, but you have a period of time to get your financing in place. Hopefully 90 to 120 days or longer to get your financing in place. So that's an important decision point. It is not the final decision point. And if I could illustrate just briefly, what happens in stage 2 is that you have 2 major tracks. You have the more complete design work, and you have the financing work. These run parallel, and if they come together and you get financing commitments, your internal financing combined with any external financing, you might get a commitment from a bank says, yes, we'll lend you this amount of money if you raise so much money from your members, and if all the construction costs come in according to what you say they are. If that all comes together at a point here, then you're nearing another key decision point where you would go back. If you're saying, yes, we have it all together, all our financing is lined up, we now can go back and remove our contingency agreement. We have our, what I would call the final decision point, the go and no-go point, at which point if you cross over that solid line, there's no turning back. So that's the final decision point. These 2 decision points are both very important, but this one, if you cross over it, you can turn back. And so the most important thing I would like you to absorb from this is understanding the difference between these 2 decision points and seeing how they would fit into your project.
And so at each stage where we had told the management to go and do this, go interview architects, come back to us and say, this is what we recommend. And at that point, we would say, we support your recommendation, and please go on to the next stage. And so they chose the architect firm that they did. And so the next point was to try and select a specific design. And so management went away and reviewed different designs. And again, we took those designs to the shareholders through open houses typically. And those went on for a couple of weeks, as I remember, a number of open houses, and they would be staffed by a board member and somebody from the management team, and we were all brought up to speed on what was happening with those different designs, what the elements were, and we'd be there to hear what people had to say. And so we'd bring all that back to our board meetings and discuss the feedback, and we would have the recommendation from the management team, and in each case we supported what their recommendations were, but those were decision points, and at those times we said, okay, please go on to the next stage. So there were a number of these points, I think 4, if I remember, it was either 3 or 4, at which management brought to us their recommendation on the next stage, the next level, and the board would decide, and we did, to proceed. Until we finally got to the final drop dead point, which was spend the money, and that's when we went ahead.
Your project is special and unique, and it might resist this type of a template, but I think it's your job as the leadership of your co-op to take your unique project and put it into this template and give yourself a 2-point major decision point to work from.
I have done 2 expansions in my career at St. Peter Food Co-op. The first one, we were not organizationally ready, and I can reflect on the pain of that expansion. The second expansion that we just went through was a completely different experience. And I really think that that has to do with our maturity as an organization, the skill level of the staff really made that much easier, and also a higher degree of sophistication from the board. So this expansion was really very, very painless compared to the first one.
That's how I think you can best work through an effective process that helps you be comfortable with the level of risk and gain an overall comfort level.
Our project of $9 million, $9.2 million, you know, it's a fairly abstract number, and it's not coming out of any particular director's pocket. And so trying to get people to relate to our responsibility, our fiduciary responsibility to the co-op and to the shareholders, it's a big challenge. And that's why we spent so much time trying to educate people what the numbers were really about, what they meant, where this money was going, why it was being allocated in these different ways. And so Alex Giori, our general manager, and Bruce Boardman, our CFO, spent a lot of time working with us on those numbers, and we reviewed them pretty much at every board meeting and kept going over them. And so finally, when it came time to make that final decision to say, okay, we're behind this, go ahead, start spending the money, make it happen, I think people had a level of comfort much more than even maybe just regular decisions where people say, yep, go ahead. People felt like they were informed.
Now, if you're working your way through stage 1 and stage 2, and as a board of directors, if not everyone is on board, that's not unusual, and that's okay. But as you work your way through here, whether you're either a consensus board or a majority board, it's important to, if there are some board members who are not comfortable with the level of risk that is being taken or not comfortable with this specific project, it is certainly important to hear their concerns and to understand why they aren't. And I suggest that you give that careful attention, and that one of the things that you can do is to say to someone, and say it to yourself even, what would it take for me to feel comfortable with the level of risk that is being taken here? And if you can answer that specifically, and if you can hear what all the directors are saying about that, and if people can feel heard, that goes a long way to helping raise that comfort level. So again, looking at it from a point of view, what would make me comfortable with this decision?
We started with the axiom, you might say, that when the board votes on this project, especially the funding portions of it, they needed to all vote intelligently. And that was the basic going in principle, you might say, which meant we didn't want anybody to be raising their hand saying, I support the project, but I don't understand exactly the financing of it. I hope that somebody here does. You know, that you could hear that in boards from time to time. You say, well, you know, I trust that some of you other financial people understand it. But we didn't really want that this time. We wanted to get the board as informed as possible about the financial situation, what risk we were taking on, how much money and why, etc. So what we did was we basically had special sessions of the board and presented to them the numbers, the way we developed the profit and loss statement, and then we took it into the cash flow statements, the balance sheets, and everything. And we really presented that to them and gave them time to ask questions and not feel embarrassed about, oh, I really don't understand this or whatever.
So to clarify a little bit further here, when I talk about two primary decision points, even in stage one, there might be other decision points leading up to the final decision point in stage one. Similarly, in stage two, there might be a decision point midway. Do we feel like we're on track? Do we still want to continue to invest resources in this? And also in terms of internal readiness as being one of the components of assessing feasibility, and the strengthening and positioning work ties right into the internal readiness. It's important to realize that the strengthening and positioning work is done both at the management and operations level and also at the governance level. And so a board can be saying, how can we best prepare ourselves from an internal readiness and a capacity point of view in terms of our leadership, in terms of our, even in terms of our succession work. An expansion project can take 3 years to go from stage 1 through stage 4, and then you have the initial 3 years of operations, which are also important. So you're looking at a span of time of 6 years. How does the board continue to work through that time, continue to strengthen itself, and build its capacity and its leadership qualities?
You know, in working towards building the board capacity and with changeover, turnover on the board, we had this constant need to bring new people up to date, as well as just build capacity for the people on the board. And so I worked with Marilyn Scholl, who is our board consultant from CDS, and she was immensely helpful in helping me think out how to plan out our board meetings to give people the information they needed. At one point, we had a couple of meetings that were separate from our board meetings that were specifically about the financials, how to look at these financials and how to understand them. And I think that's a challenge for board members all the time, to be looking at spreadsheets and making sense out of them. And all of a sudden, we weren't just looking at the spreadsheets from the normal operations or our co-op. We were talking about an expansion project, and the numbers were huge and in great detail. And I'd say there were only a couple people on our board who really had the information and back of them to look at those spreadsheets and those numbers and make sense out of them. So having these separate meetings were really good, because we got a chance to totally focus on the numbers and these financials for the expansion and talk them over in great length. People really dissected it, and I think that the board members really appreciated having that opportunity to focus in detail on stuff that, I think typically directors don't have a great level of comfort with numbers. But I think at the end of that process, people felt like they understood basically what they'd be voting on when they said, okay, go ahead and spend the money.
In order to learn more about this, we have a time set aside in each one of our board meetings where we examine possible ends with this regard. And so, for example, this year we've been looking at the history of the Three Rivers Market Co-op and the history of co-ops in general, looking at ways to cultivate interest in people being on the board of Three Rivers Market. So we've developed a committee, perpetuation committee, where we've developed a list of Knoxvillians who we think would be good members, that are good people to have on the board, and are also members of the co-op. And looking at different things like community economic empowerment and ways that the co-op can contribute to that process. And so that's basically what we've been trying to do, is just engage in a learning sort of process now that we have the store, and figure out ways that we can move forward even beyond what we are now, instead of just resting on our laurels.
So as we look at this timeline for a project, and you begin to see how your project might fit into this, and in your role as a board member, what is the role of the board? What is the role of management? If you have a set of policies that are primarily intended to keep your current operation and organization going, you want to continue the monitoring of those policies, and while you begin looking and trying to monitor this creature that we are calling a project. And how is that done? And is it such that the manager is plenty busy doing this, that the board thinks they need to take on this whole project? Or do you continue in the direction where you are delegating responsibility for the full organization to the manager, holding them accountable, and you begin to bring these two pieces together in a way, and that's a transition into that. And so what type of reporting do you need? How do you ensure accountability? And how do you have inspiring empowerment?
In terms of empowerment and understanding that chain of command and knowing whose decisions were what, I actually really credit a lot of pre-work done with actually CDS in terms of working with our board consultants, in terms of working with Bill. I think we went into this project at a very early stage, understanding very clearly what those points were, where the big decisions had to be made, and the the reporting that I had to do to keep them up to snuff on the things that I was delegated. I'm going to do a little commercial here for Bill's expansion toolbox because it was valuable. We bought one for every single board member, and it was really brought out for several years as our guiding light, and it was extremely helpful in everyone understanding those distinctions.
Are you giving clear direction to your manager? And would your manager say, how would they answer that question? Are they getting clear direction from the board? I ask that question of managers a lot of times, and they have to stop and think. And some of them say, yes, I feel I'm getting clear direction from my board, and yes, I feel I'm authorized to pursue expansion opportunities within certain parameters, and they're comfortable and clear on that.
Early in the process, the board was a little bit too aggressive. This is before I joined the board, but it's my understanding that there were some, the board members trying to be too active in the day-to-day role of looking for a new property, and that was causing problems with the staff's operation of the store and in the expansion process. So we really had to take a step back, and realize that we needed to be in the background, and so we're very careful about that.
So other managers that I ask that question to don't feel empowered, and they sometimes feel disempowered. The board might be very well intentioned, and the board sets up a task force, an expansion task force, to explore an expansion opportunity, and the general manager gets to be part of that task force, but that task force then is reporting to the board, and the general manager is maybe supposed to report to the board, so then there gets to be confusion. If there is any type of committee related to expansion planning, I suggest that it be a management committee at the sole discretion of management, and that they can populate that task force or committee with whoever they want at whatever time during the project. And that the accountability is important, that it go directly from the manager to the board. The board is empowering the manager to act. And that sets the tone that goes through the full organization in terms of empowerment and in terms of accountability. So I think it's a very important piece for the board.
I think the most powerful part of that, though, was our monitoring process that we did. So every other month for, like I said, well, 30 months during the search, plus another gosh, it was another 15 months of build and get ready and things like that. So 45 months. We we spent a lot of time. Every other month, I would monitor that policy and put in front of them where we are in the process. Actually, for that, I used Bill Gessner's sort of phases, making sure that we were looking at his readiness model and saying where we were in terms of readiness in those 4 areas.
With the accountability, that's really, for so long that used to be kind of a dirty word, but it's really can be very meaningful. And if you have clear roles and accountability, the satisfaction level, both serving on the board and doing the rather heroic job of being a general manager, the satisfaction level can be much higher, I believe.
Well, I'll tell you this, we had a lot of fun in this project, actually.
Well, since this was a multi-year project, we really started out with the question, you know, what is it that our member owners want? And it started with a very, very lively annual meeting where we actually just put the question out to people if they really thought that this should be our future. When we got a really good response from that, that's when we continued on our quest to change our equity system, which involved a whole lot of member support. And when, you know, we went from $80 to $200 partially to be able to afford a project, that was a big leap for people. And when we got a very, very strong positive vote from our owners, then we really knew that we had a lot of support. We subsequently went on to raise, you know, close to $900,000 in member shares, which also was an enormous boost for us in terms of knowing that our members supported an expansion. It's kind of like we always say, you vote with your fork when you're grocery shopping, and I think this is an example of our members voted with buying equity shares to, you know, vote that that's what they wanted to see happen.
I think it's just really exciting to be where we're at right now because we are doing way better than we expected. So while it was this big, huge risk and we were really scared to go ahead with it, even though we had all these experts helping us out and helping us choose a safe expansion route, it still was really a lot of unknowns and it was pretty scary. But we are doing really, really well, and our owner count keeps growing, and we're not really trying that hard to do anything about that right now, but people are coming in and loving it, and that's just really exciting.
In 2009, we had 1,881 owners. By 2011, that it had grown to 2,879 owners. By this month, we now have 4,409 owners. So from 1,881 and 3 years ago to 4,409, I think that we are connecting with people in the community who want to be members of Three Rivers Market. This year, we had I believe six people run for the board for 3 slots, which is pretty good for us. Usually we have exactly enough people to run for whatever slots are available. And this year, we're actually having a pretty major competition for those 3 slots that are coming open. So I think that's one indication that we are connecting more with the membership and that they want to be members of the board. And you know, like before the store moved to this new location, the board was always kind of real, like I said, in the background. And I don't think there many of the members of the store, of the Three Rivers Market Co-op, even know about the board or what we do or what purpose we serve. So I think it's exciting that, you know, people are starting to notice us more and want to be a part of it.
Everything we did during our expansion process, really for the years even leading up to the expansion process, every conversation that we had with our community and with our owners or with our people coming into the store was an opportunity to build relationships. And that, to me, that was the fundamental piece. Like, we had strong relationships going into this expansion from everybody, from just a shopper who came in every once in a while but felt connected and felt like they were being heard and respected through the shopping experience, all the way up through what they might want to see in a new store, all the way up to board members who got more and more and more involved, from being owners at the beginning of this process to becoming board members and saying, I really am so excited about this process. And I look at every event that we did and every change to the bylaws or purchase of a new piece of equipment, it was all an opportunity to say, this is all going toward making this organization and this community better. So thanks for being part of this with us.
So I wish you luck, and I wish you the best in terms of having an effective process that will bring you together to the final decision point. Thank you.